when the world is in crisis
การแก้ไขปัญหาโควิดถือเป็นวาระแห่งชาติ
and people are looking for hope and answers. Thai PBS World is there with you with the best minds of the day. Join us on Thai PBS World tonight, every weekdays at 7 p.m. Thai PBS World, we bring Thailand to the world.
Very good evening and welcome to our 7 o'clock news, Thai PBS World Tonight. I am Vorayuth.
Good evening, I'm Thep Chai Yong. And the political scenes appears to be more and more busy, right? With students' rallies still continuing with no signs of dying down easily. And with the attempts to amend the constitution gathering more steam now. So it looks like we're going to have weeks of busy activities, politically speaking, around the corner.
Yes, and as usual, with the local infection today, still no new case of local infection, but there is one report of one more new infection. She's Russian national who come to Thailand, but she is in state quarantine. So far, no local transmission yet. But the government is trying to ask expatriate members in Thailand to travel domestically to try to boost local tourism because right now we still cannot open for 100% for foreign visitors to arrive in Thailand.
We certainly need to make up for the loss of revenues from foreign tourists, right?
Yes.
But tonight we'll start with the latest on the much publicized hit and run case involving Kun Vorayuth, Yuvittaya, and heir to the Red Bull business empire. No, in fact, the whole saga essentially boils down to one question. What was the speed he was doing when his Ferrari crashed into a motorcycle on Sukhumvit Road one morning 8 years ago, killing the driver of the motorcycle, Sergeant Major, on the spot? An initial report of the police suggested that he was doing close to 180 kilometers an hour, a figure supported by a physicist of Chulalongkorn University and who was then an advisor to the Central Police Forensic Science Division. A subsequent medical examination also found 2 chemical substances in Vorayuth's body system, which suggested that he might have used cocaine. So at the time, it seems that it was beyond all doubts that police had a very solid case against the young man who not only did not stop to help the crash victim, but also hold himself up in his residence in Soi Thong Law, ignoring police order to give himself up. It was not until the evening, more than 10 hours after the incident, did he agree to surrender. Fast forward to 2020, Vorayuth, who is better known by his nickname Boss, is still nowhere to be seen. He fled the country in 2017, only days before he was to be summoned to face charges. And police were seen as dragging their feet in wrapping up the case against him, even allowing the statute of limitations of some of the charges against him to expire. And then came a shock last month. The public prosecutor decided to drop all charges against him, and the police raised no objection to the decision. Senior public prosecutors finally came out today in a press conference to offer an explanation as to what lies behind their handling of the case. From their point of view, it was clear there was no solid case against Vorayuth based on the police report submitted to them. The police report did not mention anything about speeding or drug substances. According to the spokesman of the Office of the Attorney General, Prayuth Pechkun, the public prosecutor in charge of the case simply found no grounds to charge Vorayuth for reckless driving that allegedly caused the death of the police sergeant major Vichian Kanprasert.
Central to the decision by the public prosecutor to drop the case was a testimony of a police officer from the Central Police Forensic Science Division, Police Lieutenant Colonel Thanasit Tang Chan, that Vorayuth's car was traveling at no more than 70 km per hour. But the same police officer concluded upon investigating the scene of the incident and footage from closed-circuit TV that Vorayuth was speeding at 177 km per hour. There has been no clear explanation of the discrepancy in his two versions of the car speed. And what raises an even bigger question is that the estimate of Vorayuth's car speed by Dr. Suthon Vijan Wannalak, a physicist of Chulalongkorn University, was not included in the police report. Dr. Suthon was an advisor to the Central Police Forensic Science Division and was invited to help in the investigation into the incident. Dr. Suthon has estimated that Vorayuth was traveling at a speed of 177 km per hour at the time of the incident, the same speed as initially confirmed by Police Lieutenant Colonel Thanasit, and in a number of media interviews in the past week, Dr. Suthon said he still stands by his estimate. Two witnesses have also come forward to claim that they were driving behind Vorayuth's car and saw the police Sergeant Major Vishian's motorcycle cut in front of his vehicle. The two also claimed that they themselves were traveling at a speed of only 60 to 70 km per hour. One of the witnesses died in a road accident in Chiang Mai last week, only days before he was to testify before a House committee probing the case.
So what the public prosecutors are trying to tell us is that the decision to drop all charges against Vorayuth is based entirely on the police report. And according to them, the police report is not solid enough to have the suspect prosecuted. But the good news is that they believe that the case is still not closed as many people have feared. The spokesman of the Office of the Attorney General said the public prosecutors will recommend the police to relaunch an investigation into charges of reckless driving causing death against Vorayuth. Police investigators will also be asked to consider pressing charges of drug abuse against Vorayuth, who was found to have substances in his body system that suggested he might have used cocaine. Vorayuth said the estimate by Dr. Suthon that Vorayuth was driving at a speed close to 177 kilometers an hour is considered to be a new piece of evidence that warrants a reinvestigation of the case. Under the Thai laws, cases dismissed by public prosecutors can be reviewed only when there is new evidence or witnesses. Spokesman Vorayuth also said despite evidence that there were two chemical substances in Vorayuth's body system that suggested that he might have used cocaine, he was never charged for alleged drug abuses. The latest move by the public prosecutors is welcomed by Manna Nimitmongkol, Secretary General of the Anti-Corruption Organization of Thailand, which has been closely monitoring the case. He told Thai PBS that it should shed more light on the scandal, which he described as a betrayal of public trust in the justice system. However, he said the findings of the public prosecutors still has not answered questions as to who should be held responsible for what happened. Now, let's move to the political front, Kunatta. And there have been quite a few interesting political developments in the past few days. Students' rallies against the government have continued unabated, with growing calls for Prime Minister Vorayuth to resign and the constitution to be rewritten. The student rallies, mostly attracting a few dozens, have spread to several provinces outside Bangkok and have been mostly peaceful. And Prime Minister Vorayuth said today that he was ready to sit down for talks with the student activists. He said he has ordered authorities concerned to organize a forum for him to communicate with the students. However, he today did not address the demands made by the students which include his resignation and the rewriting of the constitution. He once again cautioned the students not to cross the line. Though he was not specific, he is understood to be referring to an anti-monarchy message sent out by some of the student activists. And on another political front, the move to amend the constitution seemed to be gathering steam, with MPs from both the government and opposition camps pledging to sign on. But one big question is whether they will be able to convince members of the Senate to come along. Without the support from the Senate, any attempt to amend the constitution is most likely to be doomed. Leading the campaign is Pheu Thai, the main opposition party, whose aim is to have a broad-based body to rewrite the constitution, similar to the charter writing body that gave birth to the Constitution of 1997, which was hailed as the most democratic constitution the country ever had. Key figures of Palang Pracharat and Democrat, two partners in the Vorayuth coalition, also voiced support for the move to amend the constitution. They insisted that amending the constitution was part of their election pledges. Sutin Kangsang, a senior Pheu Thai MP and the opposition whip, said today he hoped to file a motion with the House of Representatives seeking a consensus for a charter amendment very, very soon. He said the immediate target is Article 256 of the Constitution, which governs how the charter can be amended and is seen by critics as the biggest hurdle under the article. On the outset, a constitutional amendment needs the support of at least 1/3 of the Senate, or 84 out of the 250 members of the Senate, to be taken up for consideration. And for such amendment to be passed, it needs a simple majority of both the House of Representatives and the Senate. The 250 members of the Senate were handpicked by the now defunct National Council for Peace and Order, which ran the country after the coup in 2014. They have a wide-ranging power, including a major say in the appointment of Prime Minister. Senate President Phonphet Vichitcholachai said he agrees with the idea of amending the Constitution, but questioned the wisdom of having a broad-based constitution writing body, as suggested by Pheu Thai key figures. Prime Minister Vorayuth meanwhile said he has no objection to the attempts to amend the Constitution if they touch on the right points. He also said the government has its own version of a constitutional amendment, but did not elaborate.
Yeah, so it will take time for a while before we know all the cabinet reshuffle, Kun Thepchai, and amending constitution that the student protests have been calling for. And to be back to local tourism right now, Thailand cannot open up 100% for foreign visitors. So another target that tourism ministry is trying to boost for local tourism is from expat community in Thailand to travel more, and that has been proposed by tourism ministry and sport ministry, that they try to talk to hotels in Thailand not to have discrimination of pricing against expat community in Thailand. Pipat Ratchakitprakarn, the tourism and sports minister, said the ministry urged expatriate associations to travel domestically instead of going abroad, as they may face back-to-back 14-day quarantines when arriving at other destinations and then upon returning in Thailand. The idea has received some positive feedback from expatriates, but points of concern remain regarding local sentiment towards foreigners during the outbreak and overpriced accommodation. He said the Tourism Authority of Thailand is working with hoteliers and the Tourism Council of Thailand to ensure expatriates will receive the same hotel rates as locals. The government does not have any stimulus measures for expatriates. He said 2 million expatriates normally take overseas trips, especially to other Southeast Asian countries during holidays rather than within Thailand. If expats who work here travel in Thailand 4 times during the remainder of the year, that would entail 8 million trips for the tourism industry, Mr. Pipat said. While residing in Thailand, most expatriates tend to travel with family, play golf and shop, spending 6,000 to 8,000 baht per day on average, he said. This outlay is almost 2 times higher than local travelers who spend around 4,000 baht per day. Bangkachao in Samut Prakan, under the supervision of the designated area for Sustainable Tourism Administration, is a potential destination for expats. If we can stimulate domestic travel to 120 million trips, it is possible to accomplish this year's goal for tourism revenue of 1.23 trillion baht, Mr. Pipat said. So that's quite a high aim.
That's
We have
right.
tried to boost local tourism from expat community.
Now we have talked to Kun Pipat, and he admitted that he values the contributions made by the expat community in Thailand to tourism, and he certainly want to see more expats in Thailand travel domestically,
Yeah.
because he knows that these people cannot travel overseas. So why
Yes.
not encourage them to travel more in Thailand then?
Yeah.
And we have talked to some members of the expat communities here, and they said they are also happy, to travel more inside
Yeah.
the country. But of course, they want the government to sort of show some symbolic gesture in the way of encouraging them to travel. They see this visit Thailand for Thai travelers, right?
Yes.
Or these incentives. They also would like to see some, not to that extent, but some
Yeah.
kind of a gesture from the Thai authorities that can be seen as an encouragement for them to travel.
Yes,
Yeah.
of course, they want acknowledgement to acknowledge that they are members in Thailand of Thai family as well. And pricing is really important, as Minister has mentioned, that it shouldn't be discriminated against expat community. So let's see whether this scheme will be successful to attract foreign traveler or expatriates to travel more domestically. And talking about COVID-19 right now in Southeast Asia, in the Philippines, the president just announced another lockdown, but this time seemed very serious. And Kunat Bunak has this story for us. So what's really coming up with Philippines and COVID-19?
Just like you said, the lockdown this time is very serious because they've been seeing a surge of new COVID-19 cases for days now. And the stay-at-home orders are now in place for the capital city of Manila, as well as 4 surrounding provinces, which is on the island of Luzon. And these stay-at-home orders will be in place for 2 weeks. So that means everyone has to stay at home. Public transport and domestic flights will also be suspended, while restaurants will be restricted to only takeaways. But if we all remember, the Philippines imposed the first lockdown back in mid-March and ended around June. And based on many media outlets, they said that the Philippines lockdown here is the world's longest and strictest lockdown. So the new lockdown that has been imposed looks like the country is definitely going back to square one.
So what about the number of local infection in the Philippines? It must be rising sharply.
It's constantly increasing every day with thousands and thousands of new cases. And as of today, according to the Department of Health in the Philippines, it has recorded around 6,000 new cases as of today. And that's a new single-day record high, bringing a total number of infections to 112,593. And many of the hospitals across the Philippines at the moment have been struggling to cope with the increase of new infections. And in some areas, hospitals are reported to have been forced to turn these patients away because the capacity is not enough to handle all these new infections. And doctors have hoped that the new lockdown that has been reimposed will now give medical workers more time to deal with these cases as well.
In fact, doctors and nurses in Manila have come out to warn the president that the country is on the verge of a crisis if nothing was done to stop this spread of the virus. So maybe he the decision to be stricter with the country resulted from that.
Definitely, and not just only the surge of new cases, but all of the doctors and nurses came out to say that they're on the verge of crisis here, and we're seeing that the economy in the Philippines are already under a recession because of this as well.
And so far, how is the reaction from President Duterte?
Well, apart from reinstating the lockdown, Mr. Rodrigo Duterte also approved the hiring of medical professionals to enhance the workforce, especially for handling the situation and treating COVID-19 patients. But it seems like there's one more thing that Mr. Duterte can be angry about. So yesterday he criticized the doctors who raised concerns about the country's health system, in which he challenged them to declare a revolution. But it wasn't clear how the revolution idea came up, as the statement from the doctors didn't even mention about rising up against the government.
It's
So
very
that's-
typical of Duterte, to respond to criticisms in that manner.
And he seems to be very aggressive with every single remark. If something makes him angry, he would just respond in a
Duterte.
very, very angry Duterte.
Yeah, he was even coined as Trump of Southeast Asia.
Oh, yes, I still remember that.
Yeah, and Kunat, yesterday you told us about how serious the situation was in Australia. So far, what's the development?
So the situation is pretty much the same like yesterday and last week, where we're seeing more cases of COVID-19. And today, the Victorian government has announced that the military personnel will be deployed across the state to enforce COVID-19 isolation orders. So that means if you're not staying at home, you breached the stay-at-home order, they will definitely face tough new fines up to 5,000 Australian dollars. But the only exception is that if you're going out for an urgent medical care, that would be an exemption. But if not, if you're not staying at home, you'll be fined up to 5,000 Australian dollars. At the same time, the city of Melbourne will also close retail, some manufacturing, and administrative businesses from this Thursday, which is part of the 6-week lockdown. However, just like previous lockdowns we've seen, supermarkets will still be open, as well as restaurants, allowing takeaway and delivery services. Schools will also move on to online learning. And as of today, Victoria recorded 439 new cases with 11 new deaths. And one more shocking piece of information here is that the number of total infections in the state of Victoria has increased to around 12,000 cases, with around 6,700 active cases of COVID-19. So the situation in the state of Victoria in Australia is still very worrying.
Very worrisome indeed.
Yeah, it's quite vulnerable situation, especially when compared during the first wave, they seem to handle the situation quite well.
Exactly, because when people look at Australia or even New Zealand, these two countries have been very successful in dealing with the pandemic, but all of a sudden they experienced a second wave, and we didn't even expect this at all.
And that's why the warning, don't lower your guard, is become even more important. Yeah.
And this would be the best example, including other countries as well, that are experiencing second waves or probably third waves as well.
Yeah. And what about development of other stories?
And just so you know, these are the stories we've also been following today.
Thailand recorded one new case of COVID-19 today, who is a Russian national arriving from her home country, currently in state quarantine. The total number of infections to date are 3,321, with no new recoveries nor fatalities. The Civil Aviation Authority of Thailand has lifted its entry ban on 4 groups of foreign nationals, which will take effect today. The 4 groups are non-Thai nationals with a certificate of permanent residency, non-Thai nationals with work permits, non-Thai nationals permitted to enter under a special arrangement, and migrant workers whose employers are allowed to bring in workers. To be allowed to enter Thailand, they must have a certificate of entry issued by a Thai embassy or consular office in their country, a health certificate showing that they're free of COVID-19, and a health insurance policy. Upon arriving, they will also be quarantined for 14 days at state venues or alternative locations. The Thai embassy in Tokyo announced today that the Japanese government has agreed to allow selected groups of Thai people to enter Japan. They include short-term visits for business and long-term stayers, including those who work in Japan in the residence track category. The Thai government has also been negotiating with its Japanese counterparts over visits to Japan by Thais in the business track category. Rescuers have recovered the body of another ferry crew member, which had washed ashore on a small island not far from Koh Samui today. Meanwhile, Thai Navy SEAL divers have abandoned an attempt to survey the sunken ferry after encountering strong currents and winds. Teams are now focusing on land-based searches.
So countries still remain vigilant on COVID-19. And Kun Thepchai and Kun Nat, on the 6th and 9th August this year, it means 75 years anniversary that the US dropped bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and that marks the end of Second World War. And up until now, especially the young generation still voice their concern to the end of atomic bomb.
The hibakusha literally means person affected by the bomb. They have for decades been a powerful voice calling for the abolition of nuclear weapons. As Japan makes 75 years since the devastating attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, the end of the Second World War. And the last generation of nuclear bomb survivors are working to ensure their message lives on after them. The average age of a survivor now is a little over 83, according to Japan's health ministry, leading an urgency as they share their testimony and call for a ban on nuclear weapons. The attack on Nagasaki killed 74,000 people, came 3 days after a first bomb devastated the city of Hiroshima, killing 140,000 people. Jiro Hamasumi said that if we don't speak, the bombing will be forgotten as it has never happened. That's why we must keep the history and people testimonies on record. Otherwise, we won't be able to pass on our message to our children's generations. Terumi Tanaka said that Hibakusha believed that the world must abandon nuclear arms because we never want younger generation to experience the same thing. But if young people don't feel the same way, our effort ends up like a swing and a miss. Even if we want to pass on our experiences, we cannot, unless they have their desire to listen to us. As the Hibakusha age, they are passing the baton to young activists, many from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, who have grown up steeped in the memories of survivors.
And back to Thailand, we can say that right now the atmosphere of politics is being tense again with the calling of the students' rally to amend constitution and stop political harassment. And what will be the solution or implication under this stage, especially on the solution of economic impact during COVID-19? Right now we have Kun Korn Jatikawanit, Kla Party leader and former finance minister joining us live in the studio. สวัสดีค่ะคุณกรณ์
สวัสดีครับ
ค่ะ
สวัสดีครับคุณนัท
Thank you for joining us. So we would like to start with something that may not concern you directly, but I'm sure it worries you. I'm talking about this much publicized case of hit and run, case against an heir to the Red Bull business empire.
Right.
What does this tell you? I mean, despite the overwhelming evidence against him and that he was let off the hook, so certainly we have seen the public outrage over this decision by the
Yep.
public prosecutor.
Well, I don't think I need to add to that outrage. But we, the party, Phak Kla, we did make a statement about this very recently about potential reform that we think needs to be made to the judicial process, especially to the appeal process, because in this current constitution, the right to appeal the decision by the Attorney General is with the police, which I don't think makes sense because the police was part of that process in the first place. Whereas previously, in the previous constitution, this right was with the provincial governors. And I think that the least that should be done is that the final appeal or the final decision should be made by the provincial governor. At least what that means is that it's a different department. And hopefully that increases governance and best practice.
It provides some kind of more check and balance.
Correct. And at best in the future, because we also propose at Phak Kla that provincial governors are eventually elected. At best, it means that a representative that was elected by the public can have a say and help to provide that check and balance.
And with the political atmosphere in Thailand, you must have seen how students, young people are really active and coming out to protest.
Yes.
So what do you see the role of young people in politics?
I think it's good to see them active. I mean, prior to this, we were all saying that this generation is the so-called Generation Me, just taking selfies and not showing interest to the world. Well, they're proving us wrong, which I think is positive. We've been very, very keen to say, look, within the law, they definitely have the right to express their opinion. Obviously, it's been a concern that's been, I think, overstepping the line, especially with regards to the monarchy as an institution. And I think the students need to be sensible about that and to be more careful about that. We're worried that if they proceed that way, this could all end badly, and that it may even lead to violence and a kind of conflict that we don't want to see in this society. So I think they should be careful on that issue in particular. But broadly speaking, kids are showing different ways of displaying their thoughts and their opinions. At Phak Kla, over the past 10 days, we've had a very intensive involvement with youth through our youth program, Kon Gen Kla, which is what we call it. There were about 50-odd kids who participated in this. We gave them tools we believe they need for the 21st century, including a very successful e-commerce day where we had experts and professionals come to help introduce them to the skills of selling and buying through e-commerce. And then we had a very interesting 24-hour policy hackathon where these kids individually indicated what they thought their pain point was from their perspective regarding Thailand, Thai society. And then they themselves had a vote to pare the 53 ideas down to the final 6. And then had an overnight sort of hackathon amongst themselves to define what the problem is, propose potential solution, and then to basically express their suggestions to us as a party. So for me, it's a very constructive way of engagement. I also believe, in any case, that political parties nowadays shouldn't serve any particular age group, but needs to work with all age groups equally. So from that perspective, I think what we learned, we meaning those of us who are members of Gen X, or in the case of myself, a baby boomer, what we learned was, in fact, kids often come up with the best ideas. And I think the reason why they do, or the reason why they can, is because they're not constrained as we are by barriers, and through experience of how difficult it might be to resolve these issues. And once you're not bound by that, you're more free to suggest and to use your imagination and to express what can often be real pains that basically haven't been addressed. Where we come in, basically, is to use our experience to help guide them and as much as we can in order to reach a practicable solution to try to resolve those problems. So it was a very interesting process and a great sort of 10 days for all of us.
Yeah, but within this present political and social context, as far as you can see, what are these people's, young people, aspirations, and what kind of society that they want to see in the country? Yeah,
I think they want to see a more modern society, and I think captured within that term modern means all kinds of things, like democratic, transparent, equal, clean in terms of environment and quality of life. I think encapsulates all those things, and I think that's a great aspiration to have. I think, frankly speaking, Thailand's fallen behind over the past decade or so. Whether it's in terms of application of use of technology, or even in terms of democratic development. So there's a lot that needs to be done, and I think the kids are giving us a very clean and clear statement of what they want to see.
And what do you think they see in you?
Some old guy.
Beside that.
No, I hopefully they see me as somebody who is genuinely open-minded and genuinely wants to hear what they have to say and listen to any advice that they might have. I think that's, if they see me that way, I think I'm doing my job properly.
You said there was exchange between the meeting between the young generation who participate in Kongen Kla. You also had former Prime Minister Anand Panjarachun. So what's the exchange between older generation and younger ones?
You are the bridge, right?
There was a question from a young Kongen Kla. I think she was about, I'm not sure, 19, maybe 20. She got up to ask the final question. And before she asked the question, she said, Kun Anand, I really like your vibe. Literally, she used that word. And she spoke in Thai, but the word vibe was in English, which I thought, wow. that was cool.
It's very cool, yes.
And Kun Anand thought the same. So I think there was basically great chemistry that was going on between the kids, my generation who were, and Gen Xers who were organizing the event, and Kun Anand, who was, he's 88 this week, still as sharp as a razor, but obviously from a different generation. And what was going on, that vibe in that big room, I think was something that was very special for all of us that was there. And I think it was a perfect example of all generations sort of working together for the same goal, maybe through different paths, but towards the same goal of a better society. I was actually surprised also that when I led on, we kept it a secret for a while that Kun Anand was going to come on the final day. But when I did let on to them a couple of days before, I was very pleasantly surprised how clearly and obviously very excited they were of the prospect, because frankly, I wasn't sure whether they even knew who he was, you know. And they, you know, they then went away and did some more homework, so they knew what to expect. They treated him. They called him P, but they, but
And then would be
Yeah,
fragile.
he would be very happy.
but they treated him with the level of respect that, you know, we would hope that the young would, of somebody who is so esteemed. But you know, it was great, and you know, hats off also to Kunanan for sparing his time.
So one more question about the new generation of people, especially the student activists who have been rallying around the country. The Prime Minister said today that he planned to sit down for a dialogue with these people.
Good.
So what would be your suggestion to the Prime Minister so that the country can really harness, I mean, the vibrancies of the young people?
Well, he should. First of all, I'm quite glad that there is a committee that was set up in Parliament that will allow the young to voice their opinions to members of Parliament. I hope they get a chance to do that in the big hall, in front of all members, rather than just the ad hoc committee members. I think Kun Prayuth, you know, if he's sincere in wanting to listen, that can only be good news. But listen, let's really listen, and don't have your team screen who it is that gets to come in to see you. You know, you can see who's voicing dissent and who's unhappy. Invite them, bring them over. I think, you know, that's what well, Parliament should mean, but also that dialogue between the leader and a very important segment of the people who he's mandated to govern. That dialogue is very important, and the more that there is, the bigger the gap is, or the bigger at least the perceived gap is between the young and the powerful, the more frustrated the young will feel, and I don't think that's good for anybody.
And from the capacity of former finance minister,
Right.
how do you see the direction of economy, Thai economy right now with the COVID-19?
Well, it's very worrisome because it's really going nowhere. I mean, it's gone down, and it's obviously going to show some improvement because, you know, from complete lockdown now we have at least domestic economic activity. So if you go out on the streets, it looks normal. But we're not going to be anywhere near where we were until we're able to open our borders. We are, and also until the economies of our trading partners improve, and they're a long way away from that, with a risk of a genuine second wave in terms of the spreading of COVID. So I think we're going to struggle for some time, which is why I suggested 10 points to the government at this very important time when they are reshuffling the cabinet. When you reshuffle the cabinet, it's like having a fresh start. You know, maybe whether the new people coming in were as good or better than the old one, you know, let's not get into that. But at least it's a fresh start for the government as a whole. And that allows them to, I think, take a fresh look at some of the things they've been doing, which I feel may not have worked. For example, I don't think they've taken sufficient care of SMEs and of the very small tradespeople. So, you know, that covers what, 2 or 3 million in total. None really of the economic policies that they've come up with so far has provided the direct benefit that these guys need. Frankly, they have very poor access to financial resources, very low levels of savings to begin with. And I'm not going to say they're going to struggle. They have been struggling. Some of them have already failed to survive. And the longer this goes on, the harder it will be to restart the engine. So you've got to keep them alive. And you can only do that by directly injecting the cash that the government has into their pockets. So, for example, the soft loan policy, clearly that hasn't worked. The 500 billion soft loan through that the Bank of Thailand has issued, it hasn't worked because only a very small percentage of it has been disbursed to the SMEs, and even then to the bigger SMEs, not to the small guys who really need it. We've got to take a fresh look at that. Why not have a look at the UK model, whereby they also had problems with their first batch of soft loan, to the extent whereby the government had to change the condition and basically provided 100% guarantee to the banks. And all of a sudden, there was huge take-up and huge disbursement of the loan. And I think that's the kind of courageous step that the government might need to consider. And that's aside from issues related to job losses. How do we help get people employed? And again, I think direct measures are needed to do that. Also, the big issue for us, of course, is that we're very dependent on tourism, and that's not going to improve in a hurry. But quite recently, the GLA team, economic team, working together with the GLA team in Phuket, came up with policy suggestions that we gave to the Prime Minister. And we wanted for the government to consider specific policies to make Thailand, to sell the concept of working from Thailand. Okay, and I think Thailand is seen by the whole world quite rightly as almost a safe haven from COVID. We've done extremely well in that, and Phuket remains an island, a paradise island in the mind of travelers. So make it easier for them to come. Test them for COVID, quarantine them in Phuket for the required number of days, let's say 14, and then allow them long stay working visas, 1 year, 2 years, whatever, so that they can base themselves in Phuket or elsewhere in Thailand once they pass the quarantine period. I think there'll be a lot of professionals who are mobile in the ability to pick where they do their work from, who would love to be able to have the opportunity to come to do that in Thailand. Cost of living is lower, climate's great, and as I said, great healthcare and currently free of COVID.
So
You're talking about a new rethink of the way that we should handle tourism.
That's right. And you may ask, of all the things I've talked about, where the money comes from. One of the 10 points that I propose to the government is, come on, let's completely relook at how we're going to be spending those 400 billion of loans that you're going to be making. Currently, the NESDB is proposing that the 400 billion is used for projects that are very old normal projects, usually funded through the budget. It's not appropriate for a special decree loan in an emergency. That 400 billion should be used to make direct payments, as I mentioned earlier, to those who are currently suffering from COVID. I think more treat it as an emergency source of funding and use it accordingly.
I'm sure the new finance minister, whoever he is working hard on his homework now, right?
Yeah, I'm sure.
And you were in his, this seat before, right, as former finance minister. So what do you think would be the biggest challenge for the incoming finance minister?
Well, obviously the state of the economics, at least he has the tools Same with me. When I came in 10 years ago into the hamburger crisis, the crisis was deep, but I also had the tools. And when I say the tools, I mean I had fiscal space. That is a technical term that refers to the ability for the government to borrow money to use to help us get out of trouble. Thailand, even today, has relatively low debt to GDP level. So the ammunition is there. The key is using it properly, directing it correctly at the problem, and making every baht sort of what am I trying to say? Make it count. Make every baht count. Yeah.
So in time of crisis like this, do you think the finance ministers will still have the loudest voice in the room?
No. I mean, let's face it. The loudest
Not
voice.
Not in Thailand.
No. I mean, the loudest voice in any government is the prime minister's.
But he has to listen to the finance minister when it comes to fiscal policy, right?
Absolutely, and he should listen to all his ministers. But when it comes to economic policies, he should definitely listen to the finance minister. We also have a new incoming governor of the Bank of Thailand. So very able. I call him young man because I've known him for a long time. But he's not that young anymore. But certainly very capable. And so there's a new team in town. Let's see what fresh ideas they have. And as I said, they do have ammunition, especially the finance minister. I think the governor has a harder task because I think monetary policy in current climate of near zero interest rates is very challenging.
So you mean we still have the space, still have the ammunition?
We do, but I'm very worried about how it's used.
Yeah, the determination and the right direction to
correct, and because when you're using 400 billion to build roads and whatever kind of projects that they're proposing, first of all, the money is not going to where it's really needed. It's not going to those who are suffering. Secondly, it takes a long time for these projects to go through, the bureaucratic process. Therefore, it takes a long time for the money to be disbursed into the system. What we're really looking for is the entire 1 trillion, not just that 400 billion, into the economy this year, almost, in fact, right now. But it's not going to happen if you use it that way, which is why I think it's very important that the government completely take a fresh look at how this money is going to be used.
What can we do to prevent politicians from coming into the way of the new finance minister or the new economic team in trying to revitalize the economy using this stimulus package? Because there are fears that with this cabinet reshuffle, there will be politicians wanting to have, to be very frank, to have a cut in whatever that will be spent, right? So
I'm sure.
Learning from your experience, how do you handle this kind of interference?
I had a very strong mandate from my boss, the Prime Minister, Vorayuth, and his direct help as well, also from the Deputy Prime Minister at the time, Kun Gobsak, so Sapavaso. So as a team, we understood the political challenges. I mean, we're all politicians, and but we also understood what needed to be done, and that strong support made it easier. Frankly speaking, I'm not sure whether the new finance minister is going to receive that same support. And also the fact that he's coming in fresh, not having ever been exposed to politics, or even into how the function, how the government functions, how Parliament functions. I think he's got. I don't know him very well, but I'm sure he's able. But he's got a lot to pick up in a very short space of time. There's really not going to be much of a honeymoon period, given the level of crisis that the people are facing at the moment.
I'm sure you can expect a call from him soon.
I'm sure he's not coming. He's not coming.
Yeah. That's so much challenges for Thai economy. Thank you very much, Kun Kon, for joining us in
My pleasure.
English version, but you have to stay
Yep.
with us for Thai version as well.
Okay.
And that brings us to the end of Thai PBS World tonight. And please stay tuned because we will come back for Tan Lok with Thai PBS World at 8 o'clock. For now, thank you very much for watching.
Thank you.